Benji was a wonderful dog who was full of life, but the four-legged friend had a sad story to tell. He has been looking for a new home since he was a puppy. Puppies are usually adopted fairly quickly in contrast to adult animals, but here it was different. Every time Benji was adopted, he would come back to the shelter after a few days. He had already been mediated a total of 7 times and then handed it in again. The employees could not explain why nobody wanted to keep the loving dog. What had Benji done wrong that families kept bringing him back? Strangely, people never gave a reason for bringing the dog back. They just came to drop him off at the shelter, thanked the staff with a feeble excuse, and immediately drove away. Benji once again felt sad and rejected. This was no life for the poor dog, and it was taking a huge toll on him. Every time a family chose him, he was so happy that after only a few days the rejection was really devastating. Imagine you found a best friend and spent a wonderful few days with them, and then they tell you they don't want to be friends with you anymore and leave without giving a reason. This is exactly what Benji has been through on 7 separate occasions. It was heartbreaking, and the shelter staff struggled to make sense of the situation. There seemed to be no way to solve the problem or improve poor little Benji's situation. Benji was one of the most loving dogs at the shelter. He loved it when the staff came to feed him or play with him, and he enjoyed being in the company of people. He playfully barked at her and rampaged around. He might just be a little dog, but he was definitely energetic. There wasn't a general problem, and there wasn't anything they could work on to make him a better pet. One day, a zookeeper named Clara offered to take Benji home for a few days to see how he behaved outside the shelter. Perhaps by observing his behavior firsthand, they could find out exactly what the families didn't like about him. So she wrapped it up and took it home for a few days. Benji was very excited again because he wanted to embark on a new adventure. It seemed like you could never put your spirit down too much. Every time he left the shelter, he hoped that he would stay with his new family forever. Clara smiled when she saw how excited he was. But in truth, she was a little apprehensive and worried about how the experiment would go. What if Benji was a nightmare outside the shelter? Could he be as nasty or naughty as everyone said? She would just have to be patient and wait. Only time would tell how little Benji would react when they arrived at her home. As she walked through the front door, Clara put the carrier down in her living room. Instead of luring Benji out, she patiently waited for him to come out himself. It took a while, but finally he dared to venture out. He was initially cautious and suspicious, but he became more trusting. He ran around the room, sniffing everything, barking happily and wagging his tail. Clara certainly seemed to like Benji. The animal keeper had had a long day at the shelter and it was getting late. So she decided to take a bath while Benji continued to settle down. As she opened the living room door to leave, her older dog, Maxwell, walked in. Maxwell was twice as tall as Benji and trotted along slowly, not caring the least about the newcomer. Benji, on the other hand, was like a different person. He lunged at Maxwell, baring his teeth and barking in anger. Although Benji was only a small dog, he was surprisingly intimidating for his size. Clara quickly ushered Maxwell out of the room and closed the door behind him. As soon as Maxwell was out of sight, Benji returned to his normal happy nature, as if nothing had happened. Suddenly Clara's head clicked. The next day, Clara gathered all the information she could find about Benji's previous owners. She started calling to get an idea of the situation. A very clear pattern soon emerged. All families had other pets in the house. The presence of other pets in the household triggered violent, defensive behavior in the small dog. Neither family wanted Benji to get in trouble for the reason he was returned. So they decided not to mention anything. Unfortunately, it is not uncommon in some shelters for violent dogs to be euthanized because their behavior is preventing them from finding a suitable home. Nobody wanted that for Benji. So now Clara knew what to work on. She had to try to raise Benji to be calmer around other animals. It was a hopeless endeavor and there was no guarantee that the training would work. She started slowly, only letting Benji Maxwell see through a gate on the door. The situation remained tense for several days, with Benji constantly snarling at Maxwell in anger. Over time, however, Benji got used to Maxwell's presence, and the growling and angry barking eventually subsided. One evening, Clara felt safe enough to open the gate and let Maxwell and Benji get together. She was concerned that violence would break out very quickly. But miraculously, Benji approached the older dog and sniffed at him curiously. Benji's tail started to wiggle, and he seemed keen to play. Clara was overjoyed. She had made it. She had taught Benji to be sociable with other dogs. Benji and Maxwell played all day and even curled up to sleep. It was really heartwarming, but then came the time when Clara had to bring Benji back to the shelter. The woman realized that she couldn't say goodbye to the dog, so she made a big decision. She wanted to adopt him herself, and so did she. Benji became part of the family and as amazing a pet as she could ask for. After all this time of being rejected, little Benji had finally found a home. If the story touched you, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel.